For the alumni in the room, first of all, thank you for being here. All of the current students here definitely understand the value of their network and networking, and also really want to hear your stories on what it was actually like, because you've already been through a lot of the challenges that they know they're going to face, and you also have some relationships that can really help them move forward. And on the flip side, they're doing so many things that I think 5 years from now will help the world be a very different place. I'm hoping that you get a chance to hear about some of the things they actually want to tackle, some of their ideas, and some of the technology they want to leverage. So what's the E&I track for those who don't know what it is? It's an opportunity for students who either want to pursue entrepreneurship of innovation to carve out time to work on that at MIT. And I would say it's a great program that's also evolving, similar to I don't know what was in place when many of the alumni were at MIT. With that said, for the alumni, there's actually, I think, 4 different personas in the E&I track that I hope we can cover tonight. There are definitely people in this room who know they are going to be entrepreneurs. And either they have an existing company, they've had companies, multiple companies now, where they want this next one to be really big, or they want to make serious progress while they do their MBA. But there's also, I don't know, a big portion of students who know they want to go join a startup. They want to go join an innovative company, and they hope to meet some of those companies who are on the track. Others who, like we met at Facebook, who plan on being innovators. They want to go someplace that's doing an interesting thing and take a lot of those skills that they learned from this track and apply those to either business models, technologies, new products. And then there's a cohort of what I would call amplifiers, who they may not want to do a startup, but they want to drive an ecosystem someplace in the world that maybe they want to be investors, maybe they want to go and do accelerators, maybe they actually just want to mentor in other parts of the world or drive those ecosystems. So please keep that in mind when you talk to them. And we're fortunate because the panel tonight, I realized that not only are they ridiculously impressive, but they can speak to all of those different personas. So I hope you guys had a chance to finish your meal, because I'm going to ask you guys to come on up on stage and let's begin this conversation. Give them a chance to talk a little bit about their background and some of the things they've done, and then just open it up to Q&A. So just to begin with, I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead, even though we got your bios in advance, if you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us what you're currently working on.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Julie Lein. I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners of the Urban Innovation Fund. We're a venture capital firm that invests in startups shaping the future of cities. And specifically, we provide seed capital and regulatory support to entrepreneurs working in verticals like transportation, energy and water, the future of work, etc. So we invest across a variety of verticals, but all with the goal of growing and scaling to cities across the US and hopefully beyond as well. Previously, my co-founder, who is a Sloanie, whoop, and I started a accelerator program called Tummel. It's an urban ventures accelerator we started when we graduated. So Sloan is literally to thank for my business partner and one of my closest friends.
Hi everyone, this is Anishiya. I'm CEO of a company called Peace & Co. Peace & Co. is a luxury fashion company, and we provide textiles to some of the top fashion designers, some of the largest kind of retailers. What we do is we have kind of both a for-profit mission as well as a social component. We employ artisans, mostly women, and get them jobs in developing countries, and we partner them with some of the highest end brands. And so what we try to do is do social development, build businesses, kind of introduce new ideas, and kind of provide sustainable living for artisans. My background's kind of been varied. Before joining Sloan, for 14 years, I was a filmmaker and did all kinds of stuff with Discovery Channel, History Channel, all of that. I then built a film company that I was selling and decided to choose between two different groups. There was a small startup called Amazon at the time, and there was a much larger company called CMGI at the time. And both were kind of bidding for my company pretty hard. I was like, this small startup, who knows where they're going to go? CMGI actually had named kind of the stadium after themselves. I sold to CMGI. They blew the bubble. Everything went under. Amazon actually still then acquired us afterwards. I decided to join Sloan. I did another 10, 15 years in kind of technology and did various roles in kind of, C-level roles, including, CIO and stuff. And then decided to finally kind of do a third morph of my career where I was always interested in development and social impact. When I had gone to school, I did both an MBA and a Master's in Public Administration. And kind of for this third phase, I kind of felt like I wanted to do for-profits, use all the skills I'd done with kind of building businesses, but I wanted to be more meaningful, more impactful, and do something that I felt was fulfilling.
My name is Rob Mancabelli. I co-lead the Innovator Circle, which is an organization that focuses on leadership training for companies. Before Sloan, I was in education, and I don't mean the education market, I mean in education. I was a teacher and I was an administrator. Day after I got my MBA, I got on a plane and came to Silicon Valley and co-founded a company called Bright Bites, which is now the largest K-12 data analytics company in the world. Kind of combined my knowledge of education with everything I learned at Sloan with a lot of good people from out here. At Bright Bites, mostly what I did was communication. So I did funding, I did sales, I did marketing, I did community culture and vision and mission. And coming out of the world of schools, the only parts of that I had not done before were funding, sales, marketing, mission and vision, pretty much everything. And so if any of you are looking to get involved in something that you've never done before, I can give you about 6 years of waking up every single day and saying to myself, I wonder what's going to embarrass me today. The reason I formed the Innovator Circle is because at Bright Bites we're extremely successful with what sometimes people refer to as the soft skills, which is basically everything I just mentioned. We kind of think they're the things that actually make or break companies. It's actually easier today to program out your platform maybe than it is to find a way to sell it. That's really the desire to help people with those things that I struggled with for years that led me to the Innovator Circle.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Gus Tai. I'm a partner at Trinity Ventures. Trinity Ventures is a venture firm that has an office in Menlo Park in San Francisco, which funds early stage venture-backed companies. I've been at Trinity for 21 years, 22 years now, and I'm in the process of retiring. So before that, thank you. Exactly. Yes, exactly. And the watch. But had focused on doing formation investing. So the vast majority of the companies I would back would not have a business plan, would be pre-product. Many of them were one person, and that's kind of fun and exciting. In the meantime, I spend time on boards today. I'm not making new investments. I teach occasionally at the Stanford Design School on emotional app design, and also engage in a lot of mindfulness meditation work.
That's right. Thank you. One of the things that we were talking about, we were sitting over there, was about some of the classes that you guys took. And at the time, I'm asking if you guys could share either something from your experience at Sloan that still really resonates with you or felt sort of shaped you as a leader, or to share with us something at the time you were wondering, why am I taking this class? Did you actually ever use that knowledge? And I'm going to go to Anishiya, only because I know the answer.
So I'll kind of talk about two of the classes that I thought were most useful for me. The first was negotiation. It was this experience where we first sat down and negotiated, and I always prided myself on being an awesome negotiator before I got into school. And I happened to get paired with somebody where I knew what I needed to come out with, and it was this process of frustration. We had 3 classes, we negotiated through 3 classes, and we could not reach any resolution. And the great part of that was I really felt like I was a failure in that. I was like, how is this possible that I could not establish a win-win, right? And the result of the class later on was there was no perfect answer to that negotiation. And I thought that was a really useful class for me. It kind of really established my confidence, and I don't know if it's the same person teaching, but there was this example where we had to every single day negotiate for something, whether it was useful, useless, or whatever. We had to write 1 letter a day and negotiate down the price of something, getting free airline miles. We had to do something or the other, and it just built that in your system to where it was second nature. When somebody told you anything, you said, what more can you give me? Or how else can I get this? You'd done this for 365 days of the year in negotiation class. It was just kind of internalized. The second class, I think, was kind of an organization behavior class where we had a class in leadership. And I remember being in class and saying, this is the biggest waste of my time that I have ever known when I was in school. 10 years later, some of those learnings came back to me when I was at kind of rock bottom in one of the hardest moments of my career. And I was like, aha, I get it. I'm living it right now. And I don't think you can hurry up the learning that you're going to have from anything you learn in class. But the advantage of doing that is when you get to that point and you're in that moment, the language comes back to you. You know that everyone else has walked through that point and has been in that moment. And you can talk about, you have language to understand what's happening to you and how best to react to it. So if you're in any leadership position, you know that you're going to have moments where you're out on the ledge and you're the only person there. And you've got to turn back and say, is anyone else with me or not? Am I out here alone? And having those leadership lessons come back to you is valuable even much later, because then it finally clicks in.
That's great. Give anybody else a chance to fill that.
Yeah, I would make a comment. My favorite class that I found very helpful was negotiation, but I think that the experience at MIT Sloan that was most informative were the classmates. When I think about the different constituents that I've been involved with over the last 25, 30 some odd years, what strikes me most is that the student body at Sloan has a deeper commitment to being authentic to themselves. Authentic meaning a sense of trying to understand what gives them meaning, who they are, and be true to that. And I think it's important from a mindfulness standpoint to be kind and wise in how you greet others with your own truth. But seeing people for who they are and knowing what the possibility is to be in communion with folks like that has really struck me and helped me in my career in venture, where I think the key ingredient to success as an entrepreneur, in part, is to really have a deeper understanding what one is and what gives him or herself meaning.
I'd love to piggyback off that, although I will not be nearly as deep or philosophical, unfortunately. So I was lucky enough to have one of my co-founder be one of my close friends from Sloan, and that was an experience that was completely happenstance, but it was totally worth the $150,000 commitment. So thank you, Sloan. I would say, we started working together in classes, and we were friends, and then we ended up running the swim conference, which I unfortunately learned no longer exists. Sad. But it was that experience that really taught me, okay, this is what it's like to work with this person, and I I couldn't imagine that we are business partners now 5.5 years later. The other class that I would say stands out to me is New Enterprises, which I ended up taking and then TAing for Bill Aulett, who's apparently still around. Wonderful. I never realized that my job would end up being, looking at a lot of business plans, meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs, and, a lot of those lessons ended up being a core part of what we do now, which I would have never anticipated 5.5 years ago. So I would just say embrace the randomness, and hopefully you find meaning from your classmates and really great partners and funders down the road through them.
I would have to say my class was John Van Manen's class, and I'm trying to, can someone help me with the name of it? Organizational, I can't remember the name. Basically, yeah. So basically, John Van Manen taught a course on, I guess referring back to my earlier comment, kind of all the soft skills that you're going to need as a leader. And what caught my eye about it was kind of, I think it was my massive inferiority complex. So when I was at Sloan, I used to refer to myself as the token educator. I felt like I made it in through a quota system, like they needed to have one educator in the class, so I got in, even though my qualifications were so much less than my classmates. And we'd sit in classes like, data optimization and economics, and people are like, oh man, that curve was so interesting. And I'm like, I don't have any idea what these people are talking about. And we got to this course, and John Van Manen went into this case. It was like the second case we did in the course. And it was this case of union employees slowing down work stoppages, huge contracts that are now billion-dollar contracts that are like grinding to a halt. And it's a job for you to decide. And the first guy he called on, who was a private equity guy who was brilliant, he said, I'll tell you right, he said, first thing I'm going to do is tell all these people, you do the goddamn work. And John Van Manen was very patient. He's like, well, they're not going to do that. In fact, the union boss comes to you and he says, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, then I fire all of them. And he says, you can't fire them. They're actually a seniority thing. He goes, what are you going to do now? He goes, well, then I quit my job because I'm not working at a place like this because this is ridiculous. And I was actually looking around the room and I was surprised that about 75% of the class was going, yep. like I'm pretty much quit. And I was one of the people in the class going, well, this is every day. Like, I work in public schools. Like, everyone has a job for life. Like people have tenure. Like people, you can't dismiss anyone. Like people are going to get up and do as good of a job as you are capable of engaging, inspiring, and motivating them. And like, so I start raising my hand. I'm like, I think I know something here. It's like the first time I raised my hand in class, like the whole semester. And so it was really interesting to kind of see, to your point, all the pieces of the puzzle that your classmates have, but even then, like me not understanding, like I didn't really understand what my skill set was in communication, inspiration, and motivation coming out of the school world. I'd been doing that for 15 years and didn't even realize it. So, and that class kind of opened it up for me.
So you go back to you only because you mentioned looking at the curves and the data, and it's like, what the hell? But right now,
that's why I made a data analytics company.
Yes. So can we just talk about?
It's like nobody in schools knows any of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the Sherpa. Is that an okay word to use, or is that?
Exactly. So you don't traditionally think about using data analytics for business development. Can you talk a little bit about what you are doing?
Yeah, I mean, you mean at Bright Bites, or yeah. So what we did was, so in schools, so some people might find this surprising, but 1/16 of the GDP of the United States, $1 trillion a year, is spent on public education. It's like, I'm rounding up. It's like 810 billion, and those decisions are made by 14,400 superintendents in the United States. Okay. So 14,400 people are making $800 billion worth of decisions. 99% of those superintendents have received no business training whatsoever. And most of them don't understand data. And this is not to say, I am not saying that these people are not intelligent. And I want to make that clear. These are among the smartest, most caring, most dynamic. I mean, these people could step sometimes from the superintendency into like being the mayor of a major city. Like, they are incredibly talented people. But this is often not the background they've been given. So what we did was, what my realization at Sloan was that if we could create something called ROL, Return on Learning, and teach people to use data to actually measure the impact of the dollars that they were spending in schools, and to think in terms of ROI on projects, which we called ROL, that there was an enormous opportunity here to change how an entire industry thought about their jobs. And I wouldn't say that we've succeeded in that task completely, but we've really made serious inroads in that. And there's tens of thousands of schools now that are using these products in that way. So,
we also have a body of entrepreneurs who are going to be doing work in the developing world, and many are also Legatum Fellows or aspiring Legatum Fellows. Anishiya, a question for you, because you're currently in 16 countries. Can you talk a little bit about your marketplace and the impact that you're having?
Sure. So for Peace & Co., we've been doing a lot of work on the ground, and we do all the data analytics in terms of what's the impact, how many jobs do we create, how much capacity are we creating, how much are we helping people move up the chain within their countries. It's a really interesting perspective in terms of folks. I don't know if folks have a nonprofit background. There's been a lot of evolution in terms of how nonprofits and for-profits are thinking about social impact, how to measure social impact, what are the right KPIs. The interesting thing that I'm seeing is that increasingly people are moving away from kind of the nonprofit angle, because they feel like if we're giving money, the minute we stop giving money, the nonprofit doesn't exist. How can we create sustainable for-profits that have a life and existence of their own and justification of their own? And so it's been a really interesting process in managing a very healthy tension between, working with customers. So if you have Oscar de la Renta who wants a certain gown with a certain thing, how do you balance that with the artisans in Peru who are making that fabric and make sure that both the artisan gets paid enough, but then you're making enough margin? So it's an interesting kind of business problem, as well as kind of social good problem of how to balance a healthy tension between all the different things you're trying to accomplish at the same time. My background, I did a bunch of nonprofit work initially, and worked with Mary Robinson, who was the president of Ireland, and did a lot of work around human trafficking, kind of sustainable impact investing, women's leadership issues. And I found that a lot of that early work that I did has been really useful in thinking about, as I structured this company, how to meet different objectives, push what I want to do, and how to justify to a board, how to justify to investors what I'm doing. Just as you had kind of profiles of students, there are profiles of investors who invest in you. And there's some investors who really don't care about your social mission, but are investing in you just because you're for-profit. There are investors who care about the social mission and care about the KPIs. There are investors who want to make sure they get enough money, and as long as you get them enough money, they're fine with your social mission. And you have to fulfill all the different stakeholders you have along that line. And it's an interesting thing to balance all of those, but it provides for meaningful work.
Yeah. Since you mentioned investors, and we have two investors, can we start with you, Julie, and talk about, you're talking about investing in a city, and we talked a little bit on the side that there were just two past teams that quickly came to mind that would like to improve healthcare outcomes in a city, or to help improve the city. How do you assess those teams, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, I would say that, it's really exciting to see this evolution of people who want to invest in more than just having the most profit-motivated outcome. And for me, that was always an important part of my kind of personal ethos when I was going to Sloan. And it's something that I think, the industry continues to evolve. Now there are a lot of mission and impact-driven investors. It's still a little bit of a shaky subject, I would say, and shaky world, as I was discussing with the group that visited this morning. I think that it's hard because people still sometimes hear impact and they think you want concessionary returns. And really what we're trying to go for is, hey, how can you have high growth, high scale businesses, but that they really make that kind of impact in cities that, in our case, really motivated us. And before I went to Sloan, I worked for a startup that has now kind of gone past startup stage called Revolution Foods, which is based over in Oakland. They're a healthy school meals provider. They've now grown to over 200 million in annual revenue. And at the time that I was working for them, they were legitimately smaller, but they were having such great scale and impact, and they were doing it in a way that you don't tend to see traditional community organizations kind of grow and scale. And when I went back to Sloan, I was really wondering why a lot of my very socially engaged peers were electing to start the next dating or photo sharing app. Not that there's anything wrong with it, many of us use them, but I think that there's a value to continuing to create an ecosystem where people would feel comfortable kind of breaking out of the mold. And that was really what we were trying to incentivize, first through our accelerator program Tummel, and now through our investment fund at the Urban Innovation Fund. So we are a market rate driven fund. And so a lot of times what is I feel personally is unfortunate is sometimes social entrepreneurs come to us and they really try hard to sell the kind of mission approach, and they do it at a detriment to the returns angle. And that's not really appealing to us because we are a market driven fund. We want to see both high growth, high scale, as well as real commitment to impact. And the thing that my co-founder Claire and I always talk about is that more money equals more impact. If you can create more revenue, you can expand to more cities, you can impact more workers, and it's a virtuous cycle. And so I think that now there's a real spectrum and a change in kind of the investing landscape, which is exciting. And I hope that we will continue to see really high growth, high impact companies, and we want to see them have big outcomes. So exits, IPOs. And I think we're still kind of at that emerging stage, and I think we need to see that tipping point before more money will really be deployed. The other thing that I would just throw out there, and you guys have probably heard quite a bit about this, is the vast majority of VC funding right now goes to predominantly white men, and I think that there is value to having different stakeholders in the room, so people who look different on both the funding side as well as on the startup side. So we're really proud of the fact that right now our portfolio, 73% of our startups have a woman or person of color on the founding team. And so I just encourage all of you to step up and kind of practice with your values and continue kind of promoting a diverse ecosystem.
That's great. And so Gus knows this question is coming, just because he's been on the Forbes list for having the Midas touch. Since so many companies in his portfolio have had amazing exits or returns. So since you're retiring, can you share with us, what's the secret sauce or just the secret? Yeah.
Gosh.
Yes.
Maybe I'll make an attempt at this. I think for entrepreneurs in the room, what comes to mind is first and foremost, think through yourself and what is it that speaks to you so that you could act in an authentic way for the business you have at hand. Because the organizing principle is that I think all the people I choose to fund have their own type and style of leadership that matches who they are. And as a founder CEO, what you need to be able to do is to collaborate and create a shared mission that people willingly follow. And you should do it in your own style. If you copy someone, people won't follow you. And then entrepreneurs who are founders always have an unfair advantage at acquiring resources. And so if you can stand for something, there'll be people who won't like you, but there'll be other people who are attracted to your vision, to your experience, to your past history of familiarity. And then from there, for your business itself, founder entrepreneurs have to be very skilled at thinking at a system level, identifying the premises that they have for their business, and when the premises aren't effective, to drop them. And so the more skilled entrepreneurs test very quickly. It's about learning fast, not failing fast. So you want to just learn fast and learn economically. And I think that my style and playbook is figure out what is that business where you can think at a system level and have a depth of understanding, and you have your own angle for being different. All startups have to be different. It's more important to be different than to be better. because you won't rise above the noise of your competitors. So you have some authentic point of view, you can attract people, resources, employees, dollars to help you do that, and then learn as quickly as you can. And then some of these businesses can become very large and some not as much, and that's where it's helpful to get outside expertise to help you assess what is the possibility for that business.
Yeah. So I definitely want to make sure we have time for questions. So just one more question, since I think we've covered sort of the entrepreneurs, developing world, amplifiers, and make sure we talk to the joiners in the room. Rob, you have I do want to learn about your podcast, an extremely successful podcast, and you talk a lot about sort of the future of work in this digital age. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing now and any advice you have for people who plan on going out into the workforce for this track?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably the statistic that is undersold nowadays has nothing to do with really the work world per se, and that is that the stats around longevity say that 50% of the people in this room are going to be able to live past age 100. So if you think about that, and you think about the current conception we have of like a 3-stage life, where you have education, and then you have work, and then you have retirement. If you try to retire at age 65 or 70 and stay retired for 40 years, you better have been a venture person and done very well for yourself.
With the Midas touch.
With the Midas touch. Or you're probably going to find that you have a revenue shortfall to confront. For the vast majority of people out in the room, your work life is probably going to be between 70 and 80 years, right? So when you think about, when you think about your work, like when you think like I could be doing 70 years of work, all of a sudden what you do in the next 3 years, all of a sudden doesn't seem so high stakes, right? I mean, if you want to look at this from an optimistic point of view, all of a sudden you have time to test, you have time to experiment, you have time to collect what I call data. And I like your term about, it's not about failing fast, it's about learning fast. On the podcast, we interview a lot of people who talk about the fact that like, this is all just data, right? What you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're, like this is the time in your life to figure those things out. Because if you can go into the next stage, like if you can go into the next 50 years of work, having figured out in the first 15 years of work, exactly what it is you love to do, what inspires you, what motivates you, what intrinsically makes you want to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning, can't wait to get to the office. Like, you're going to be so far ahead of everybody else. So I just really would love to take and shift our lens a little bit. And that's what we try to do on the podcast. Try to interview people who are kind of looking 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and kind of say to people, relax, and think a little more long-term when making these decisions. So.
That's great. So I will open it up for questions, and I was told we're being recorded, so we will probably repeat your question, or we'll shoot at Amplify, or like, you guys can pass it around.
Well, thank you all so much. I think we've all heard like a lot of different elements of what we should be doing while we're at MIT. So this is going to be a little bit of a weird question. I apologize in advance. But I guess like some people are saying that we should kind of like really dive deep and focus on some things. Some people are telling us that we should kind of like go broad and explore. And I think this is like the first time we've kind of heard this thread about authenticity and kind of self-awareness. I was just wondering like if you guys had concrete examples of how you use your MIT experience to kind of understand like who you were as people and like how that has kind of shaped your career, and like if there are tactical things we can be doing right now to kind of get that level of reflection, which I realize is kind of a weird question, but like one that I think is important.
Emily will get a chuckle out of this. So I write a weekly column on mindfulness, and so I would encourage mindfulness from a technology as part of meditation practice to observe. And so I'm going to be teaching mindfulness entrepreneurship. And I think it's simply mindfulness means in a non-judgmental, kind way, observe your surroundings, observe what's arising within you, and it's a way to get to know yourself better. And then from that information, if you process it well, you can make better decisions. So if you can engage in a journaling process, engage in an observation process, one counsel I would advise you all, I was a wacky venture guy early in my career. I asked my CEOs to do a review on me every 6 months. And so that to get the feedback. And the two questions I wound up asking, which I think can be helpful for most people, I would ask them, given that I'm kind of tenacious and stubborn and have OCD-like tendencies, what's one thing that I could work on every single day that 10 years from now I might be able to make some improvement? So don't ask me to grow to be 5'10", not going to happen, but something else. And so I could work on that. And the other one is, what is something that's easy for me to do that I don't do? And that is either a blind spot or it's intentional. And then it's helpful for communication to understand that. But I think getting a trusted counsel to provide feedback for you and keep a journal and notice, and you'll learn a lot.
So I have a bit of a different take here. I think that the best way to use any experience, and definitely MIT, was to be curious. Not care about what classes everyone else is taking. Be led by what drives you. I had kind of an optimized spreadsheet of how much I could sleep and how many courses I could do because I was doing a joint degree program, and MIT wouldn't let you off the hook for any classes. So I ended up doing 4 years of school in 3 years. And I basically decided I was just going to do the classes I was interested in, even if they were key classes that everyone thought you should do. And oh my God, you can't believe that she's not doing that class or whatever. And there were some incredible profs I missed out on. I found that the things you're naturally interested in and the things you're naturally curious about drive you to, people keep saying find what you're truly passionate about, and one of the things that for me was the hardest is like, what am I truly passionate about? Which shows you I did 15 years in film, 15 years in tech, and then 15 more years in kind of doing social impact. So I've kind of gone on that journey of what am I really passionate about, and I think that as long as you find things you're curious about and things you want to test, you'll be fine. So if you're curious about kind of how's globalization working, you want to take classes and do that, that's an interesting way of doing it. And then the second thing is, I don't think the classes are as important. The friendships you make are the most, and it's such an often repeated thing that it's painful, but when you need something and when you're about to sink a deal and you need some real help, you call your classmate and like, I need this done tomorrow. Can you please help? And you get help right away. Or when you're kind of lobbying for a position you really want, it's your buddy who's the chairperson of the board. And you cannot underestimate, if you haven't been good colleagues to people in your years and haven't kept in touch with them in the last 10 years and suddenly you reach out to them, you're not going to get a response. So you actually have to keep those networks alive well after you graduate. But if you really built those genuine bonds as you did, people are there and they will back you up for sure.
Yeah, I just love to add to that. I definitely optimize my Sloan experience for people. And so I don't remember what my GPA is, but I remember a lot of the folks that I met. And I would actually beg to differ on the point about reaching out to people after a long time of silence. I just met Rob here, and he said, "Oh, my wife was in this class with you that you TA'd," and I remember Gail precisely. It's those kind of connections that you end up coming back to, and many of those connections, classmates that I haven't talked to in a long time, they ended up referring startups to us. We found funder relationships. So I would just encourage you all to, spend your time however appeals to you. For me, I'm an extrovert. I loved going to, the bar night at BHP. I loved, the C functions. And so spend time with your classmates, getting to know people, and don't feel bad if, you get a B instead of a A-.
That broad versus narrow question, I think, just drives people crazy, especially people who love to optimize. I mean, it's just like, what am I going to do? You know what I mean? And I just think that it's really important to realize, and it took me a long time to realize it, that all advice is right, including contradictory advice. And the problem is that all these really great people who are really smart are going to give you all this advice that's always right, except they're not going to tell you when it's right. So, yeah, so if you know what you want to do and you go narrow, that advice is probably right. If you don't know what you want to do and you go broad, that advice is probably right. And the really brilliantly hard thing to do is to figure out like what situation am I in? It's kind of like MPV. Like, I used to laugh. They'd say, okay, so let's assume for this equation that the interest rate for the next 10 years is going to be this. And I'm like, if I knew what the interest rate was going to be for the next 10 years, I wouldn't be sitting here doing MPV with you in this class, right? You know, it's like, so the equation works if you know what you're optimizing. And so that listening to yourself, like he talked about, I think is really the most important thing. And it's hard. You know, my wife was convinced at one point, my wife went to the Sloan Fellows program, as you mentioned. Everybody was walking around saying, like, you don't take finance too, you're not in a real MBA program. And my wife has absolutely no interest in finance and was sitting there for a long time trying to figure out if she wanted to take finance too. And, you know, after a while, listened to her heart and, like, you know, had no regrets. But it's hard to get those voices out of your head, you know?
Okay, so this one is maybe more geared towards Rob and Anishiya. I think Donna and Trish and Bill do a great job of prepping us for how to be founders, how to get a company off the ground and survive. But once you are successful, you become more of a CEO and less of a founder. What do you think was important for you to be able to grow into that sort of leadership role and guiding the organization as opposed to starting something?
Okay. So I think that it's been interesting for me. I think as for the entrepreneurs in the room, you'll get a sense of what stage you enjoy, and you'll recognize that founding a company is a bit of a relay race. There's the people who like that initial chaos, wild, wild west, and you know that this is your baby for X amount of time, and you're going to hand it over. I've kind of done a lot of founding my own companies, selling my companies, and then now I kind of am in the scary range of like elder statesman, where for Peace & Co, I wasn't the founder of the company. I was brought in by the investors and the board to come run the company and scale the company from the next stage, from kind of the early stage of success to the next growth for the business. I think it's different skill sets, and I think it's knowing what challenges, and we were having an interesting conversation of what are the breaking points and the tipping points at which organizations have pain points. And as you kind of grow companies, you know what hurdles you're going to encounter. At how many, at 50 employees, here's the problems you face. At 100, here's the problems you face. At 1,000, here's what you face. At X amount of revenue, here's the kind of things you deal with. At, you know, when you're growing to a different stage, what's the issues you have. I think the thing to keep it exciting is always to be able to, and I hate to sound loosey-goosey here, is kind of what are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it, right? From a perspective of when I grew Amazon's advertising business. I was product manager 1 with a revenue of 0, and grew Amazon's advertising business literally from scratch. I had no developers, nothing, and built it up to be a fairly successful, huge business when I handed it off, and then went down to go and build up Amazon's international business. I love that early wild stage of growing something from nothing to making it exist. That's my why. Once I made it exist and it's like a 15 billion company, I'm like, who wants to come take this because I'm off for the next wild adventure? And that's where I see my value is. I've grown, I've scaled, I've solved the problems, I'm ready to go explore something new.
Sure. Thank you guys for coming once more. I'm sure across the 4 of you've seen hundreds of entrepreneurs and different paths they've taken at this point. For students, do you have any advice on when you know is the right time to go all in and into actually founding a company versus taking one of the other myriad of opportunities you have on learning from a big company or from a small business or from another entrepreneur? When do you know is the right time that now is the time that I should found my own company?
Do you want to try that?
I'll just say my 2 cents from the funding side, you can't half-ass it. you just can't. This idea of wading in and, you're kind of doing it on the side, but you want to raise funding, it just doesn't fly. We've tried in the past to do something where it's like, oh, as soon as I'm financially stable or I have enough money raised, then I'm going to go full time. Just doesn't work. It has to be all in. It has to be your blood, sweat, and tears, your life. And if it's not, then unfortunately, I think it's going to be hard to get funding.
Don't listen to the investors. Don't quit your day job till you've kind of built a base, and then quit your day job and absolutely go to the investors.
I'm Alicia, and I was wondering whether you had doubts regarding your business versus your value, and if the two conflicted at some time, how did you resolve that conflict between what you think is good for your business and what your value are?
Is that for me?
It's for the panel in general.
Sure. So I think that in large part, there's on a daily basis, you have 50 occasions of where your business interests will have a conflict with your values. And what you need to do there. I think the question is long term, why are you in existence and what do you want out of this business? And in your mind, one of them is more important to you than the other. And in the long term, those are actually well aligned. Because if today we decide that we, cut some corners, don't care about our artisans, we gain a bad reputation, we don't actually win business long term from the people that actually care about sustainability, care about artisan development. You have to stay true to what you claim, what makes you different, what makes you special, and you can never kill the golden goose, because the minute you kind of tarnish your reputation, it never comes back. So the answer to me is, in the short term, it may look like one's in conflict with the other, but in the long term, your values always win, because you get known as an ethical player, you establish a reputation, and people know what you stand for in the industry and will reward you for that.
So I know there'll be time for informal conversations, but since you guys always give the question on one final piece of advice, since you guys have this concept of, as opposed to failing fast, learning fast, can you talk about an experience that really pushed you out of your comfort zone and just provide the greatest learning, and to just give you a moment to think about that? We'll have a dramatic pause.
So in between Bright Bites and the Innovator Circle, I knew I was going to have a little bit of time. And one of the things in leadership that I think is really important is to understand the perspective of everyone who's working for you or with you. So one of the things that I decided I was going to do, the thing in between those two, was since I had come from the communications side of the business and we were a platform company, I decided that I would learn data analytics at a level that I didn't know it at. So I logged on to Data Camp. Anyone ever use Data Camp? Yeah, a lot of people. And hands back there, I saw them. And one over there. And 29 courses later in Python, R, and TensorFlow artificial intelligence, I can honestly tell you I was very confused. But also, I had a very deep appreciation for the kinds of challenges that were going on the engineering side of the house. Like, I had an appreciation for sort of the A-B decisions, like go left or go right. I had an appreciation for the length of time it takes to write a certain amount of code. I had an appreciation for a lot of things. And actually, it changed the way I think about decision making. So I would say that every once in a while, if you have the luxury to have some time to take something that's the opposite of a lot of the work you've done in your life, it can help you empathize across the entire organization with everybody who's doing all of that work. And I found it was really successful for me.
Yeah. So to build upon that point, I think that the reality is that a function or feature of our mind is that it wants to create a sense of control and a sense of predictability, because volatility creates suffering. Because when we have a loss, we feel a certain amount of pain. When we have a gain, we feel better. But overall, the loss hurts us more. So volatility creates a rising of suffering in human beings. And so we want to believe in control, but in fact, things are actually impermanent, they're unpredictable. And you could think through your career journey, and then the mind creates a narrative to make things make sense. But there have been a lot of surprises. And so for me, the biggest jarring thing for me, I'm living this life that I think is very, very predictable, doing the best I can, believing I have control. And then about a decade ago, my father developed cancer and passed away back then. And I've given talks about grief and working with grief as an opportunity, a spiritual awakening. But whether it's that, or it's about children, or it's about some loved one, something even good happening where there's just a change, winning the lottery. Like these things are surprising. And so how do you practice surrender? And so when you have this change, you want to be open to the situation at hand and relax into it. You want to accept what is. That doesn't mean you want to accept what's going to happen, but you want to accept reality as it is. Then you want to integrate it into who you are. And that is really the true journey. So when you think about broad versus deep, those are sound things. That's the part of the mind trying to want to have control. But we don't really know. I mean, we don't really know. And so draw upon your values, cultivate them with wisdom, and I think that you will live a life that will be more nourishing and fulfilling.
I'll kind of weigh in a controversial perspective on failure. And I think that this is especially relevant to all the women in the room. I think that as I was going through kind of being a leader in lots of different settings, in almost most places, I was the only woman on an executive team, right? And with people of different cultures, there were companies where I'd have like 6 big Israeli men and me. We're kind of the executive team. The wisest piece of advice I heard in my career was a random conversation that I happened to listen, and it was Marissa Meyer saying, women tend to keep trying to repeat to get everything perfect. She said, the biggest thing I learned in my life was to fail up. And that was really interesting for me, because when you look at how many CIOs hit success, what's the average rate of CEO success? What's the average rate of being able to fundraise in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What's the average success rate for an entrepreneur? You'll see that you're going to hit failure so many different times. And yes, you absolutely have to take that journey and say, what does this failure mean to me? Why? You've got to do all the processing in the inner work. But I think the two things that occurred to me is many times people take failure personally and think they failed. They don't look outside about the circumstances, the business idea, the people around you, all of that. The idea of failing up was just when somebody came to me and said, hey, do you want this new promotion? My first instinct was, I still want to get some things right in that last job. I think I want to be senior product manager again. And I had to break out of that and say, no, actually, I'll take the director role. That's fine. You know what? All good. And it was similar in terms of kind of when, people came and said, would you take X position on a public board, or would you take this? I'm like, haven't done it, don't know, fighting imposter, syndrome. I'll say yes. You clearly saw enough in me to kind of come do this. And kind of humorous story about this is I used to work at IMDb, and so I was always in the habit of kind of figuring out in the Oscars who won, and I was sitting with my husband, the two of us were trying to do this. I managed to get the most number of movies right. My husband got all of them wrong except the last 3, which were kind of the obvious ones. And his first reaction was, see, I'm meant for big things. I only get the big categories right. And that was kind of I was like, as a woman who's well established and a leader, I'm beating down on myself for saying, I can't believe I got best independent film and best 5-minute short film wrong. Whereas he's like, I got the top 3 categories, woohoo, I'm a stud. And I think that's kind of, if you go out and you feel like you're doubting yourselves, just remember, the best people know that failure stops, or you get judged for where you stop. Don't stop, just keep moving, fail up when, it works out.
It's hard to follow that. I think you need a blog about like the Nietzsche VC, something philosophical, because that was pretty moving.
Instagram, Gus Tai, at Gus Tai. I write about it. So
yeah, love it. So I would say on a tough lesson that I learned after Sloan, so we had started our business, which is essentially helping entrepreneurs who are at the really early stage get off the ground. And, we're usually the first capital in the door. We were trying to provide them mentorship and advice. And one of the first startups we supported, they start having some team problems. So the two co-founders, they were good friends in college. They decided to kind of spin out this startup that, had some real promise and potential. And, they start having this team strife. And I think at the time, I'm a people pleaser. I want to be a pacifist. I want to help people realize their potential. And I'm like, of course, I should help mediate this founder split. That's a great idea. Oh my gosh. So never do that. It turned into a crazy litigious battle. And this startup, they had like 40K in revenue at the time, and they were in litigation for probably 3 years. So it was a really tough lesson first, just because I was trying to do something where I felt like I was helping entrepreneurs. And sometimes you realize that in spite of your best intentions, you really can't kind of move the needle when there are fundamental problems. And it really made me appreciate my co-founder, because it's a person that I trust, and at the very least, I would hope would not litigate against me for 3 years. But I think it was also an important lesson, and one that I don't think I really internalized as much when I was at Sloan, because there was so much focus on, the suit and the geek, find the right complementary skill sets. You want this kind of person and that kind of person. Don't look for perfection. Look for people you can trust, that you would be happy to work with, and that you, at the very least, would not end up in a litigious dispute. But more so, you want to work with people that you can show up and have really hard conversations with and face hard battles together.
That's fantastic. I'm going to steal this one because you guys provided so many great nuggets of, one, carving out the Sloan experience to make it work for you. Don't worry about what everybody else is saying that you should take. Double down on what you want to double down on. You guys don't remember your GPAs, but you definitely remember your classmates, and stay in touch with your network, and really to leverage that network going forward. This notion of not necessarily failing fast, but learning fast. And I love this notion of failing forward, because people only remember your last failure, which is fantastic. And then broad versus narrow. I think the piece that we should all hold on to is that you're going to be at it for like 70 years. And so in the 70 years, you have a chance to test a lot of different things. And the reoccurring theme across everyone was about being really authentic to who you are as you sort of think about your company, but then also the type of leader. Are you that, like, I want the wild ride, or I want to be the scaler? Takeaway, it's all good. You guys were fantastic. Thank you so much, and they will be sticking around. You also have some fantastic other alumni at the table who also have great backgrounds and a story. So find it out tonight. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.